Well, just a day before the 2022 midterm election, over 40 million people have already cast their votes, keeping pace with the record level of voter turnout for the 2019 midterm elections. Republicans appear to be in the lead, with the polls indicating that the GOP will flip the House, where they only need to net 5 seats, and I bet they do a lot better than that. They could take over the Senate as well, which is currently deadlocked at 50-50.
Key battleground states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona will most likely determine the fate of Congress, with voters focused mostly on inflation and the overall state of the economy. Joining us now to discuss is data journalist and director of Big Data Poll, Rich Baris. Welcome, Rich.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Coming. Yes, it's great to have you. So crystal ball us. What's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the Senate obviously is a little bit more questionable, but I think it's a foregone conclusion that the Republican Party will take the House. The margin, I think that it's a solid, if, people low as 15, 20 seats. I think that's on the low end. I really do. It's a first-term incumbent midterm, and although some of the polling does make it look a little bit more competitive, we have seen this movie before. And at the end of the day, some of the indicators that are really predictive, presidential approval rating, the direction of the country, dissatisfaction in general, and the issue set, historically tells us that it's probably going to be a worse night for House Democrats than most people want to admit at this point. Maybe not, but that's historically the most likely scenario. In the Senate, there are just a lot of states where Democrats are on defense. In some of the areas where Republicans have to hold, some of our polling and others have shown that it has gotten brighter for Republicans as we got closer to this election. So again, I'm thinking we have it as the most likely is 52 seats. It's possible if there is a red tsunami, whatever you want to call it, it could go higher. But, elections, they're funny like that. There will be incumbents in the Senate that we thought were done, dead in the water, and they'll hold on. And there'll be others that we thought were incredibly vulnerable and likely to be defeated or the reverse. That we thought they would hold on, but they don't, and they're defeated. That's the nature of midterm elections.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting picture. I think I've predicted that Nevada will go Republican. I think Pennsylvania will go Republican. Then you have Arizona, where it's a little dicier. You have Georgia, where probably I suspect a runoff could come into play, and then I don't really know what that looks like. And then some people are talking about New Hampshire as well. You were speaking of New Hampshire before we started rolling. That's actually a race I think we've covered less on this show. So why don't you give us your quick take on that one?
And so the way we poll as well, but in our modeling, our model does, with some of the polls, we do reduce the weight for accuracy. And the most accurate poll in New Hampshire is St. Anselm College. And they do have the Republican Don Bolduc up a point. But another poll that was released just this morning had Hassan up by a point. So we had it actually as leaning Republicans, or slightly. It was slightly Republican. But now, because of that, it probably will move back to coin toss. The fundamentals favor Bolduc. Hassan has a major problem that Jeanne Shaheen never had. She was always underwater. On the question, if you ask voters in New Hampshire, do you think that she deserves re-election or not? Maggie Hassan always was a net negative on that question, whereas Jeanne Shaheen, who had a tight race against Scott Brown, she basically, it's not overwhelming, but she was always positive, maybe +4, +5 on that question. So in this environment, it's entirely possible that Bolduc squeaks it out. Absolutely. It's just, there are some of these states that really are pure coin tosses. In Nevada, that's another one. I know a lot of people make hay out of early voting. Look, I always tell people not to read the early vote tea leaves. We simply don't know how those people voted. The early lead for Democrats in the early vote is not as big as it has been in the last couple of election cycles. And it really comes down, we've seen this year after year in Nevada, it really comes down to that margin among independents. Donald Trump won them by about 13 or 14 points in 2016, but Democrats had a turnout advantage, and he came up a little shy. The last Republican to win statewide, Dean Heller, he won them by 20 points, 53-33. That is what our polling and other polling is suggesting Laxalt and Lombardo lead by. So it really doesn't matter what any of that early vote says. At the end of the day, if independents vote, 20 plus points, it's happened. And, if they do, then both Democrats will lose. So that race is one of the states where Republicans are actually overstated in polling quite a bit. We haven't done that, but we also had a very, very slight lead for Laxalt, with Lombardo doing a little bit better.
So speaking of independent voters, two of the trends that I'm very interested to see how they pan out. The first is shifts among Black and Hispanic voters, particularly Black and Hispanic men, towards the Republican Party. I'm really interested to hear what you're seeing on that front. And the other front that I think is really interesting is that slew of blue dog Dems who won in 2018 in, very Trumpy areas. People like Sharice Davids, Abigail Spanberger, Elisa Slotkin. Are they going to pull through? Talk to us about those two issues.
With the first part of that question, that's a great question, because that adds to the uncertainty that we're talking about in a state like Nevada. Almost all of the registered Democrat crossover, meaning Democrats, we know they're registered Democrats, but they told us they would vote Republican. In a state like Nevada, it was all non-white. It was all Hispanic, and they weren't identifying as Democrats. They were telling us they were independents. So, when you try to read the early vote tea leaves, and that's a great example of a perfect trap. So you think what the partisan split is going to be, but it ends up surprising you. So almost none of the crossover this year is among white educated Democrats or white Democrats at all. It's mostly coming from non-white. And Elisa Slotkin's a very interesting race. And I think it's one that will be more indicative of how the night went. Was it a wave? Was it not a wave? Because Elisa Slotkin was redrawn, if she was in the old Michigan 8, she'd be finished. She was redrawn into a more Dem-friendly district. And I actually watched a scope that she did where she said, we had to be creative this year. Otherwise, people like me are going to be in trouble. I thought myself, maybe 12 months ago, if she got a district like this, she would likely hold on. And yet both sides, their polling shows that this is just dead even. So if that's true, then that's a bad sign for Democrats. Spanberger in Virginia 7, I think she's gone. I really do. I don't know how you hold on when you see shifts. If you go backward and rewind to 2021, when you see shifts like this, 10, 12 points, it's very hard, even though she is also in a more, it was redrawn to be more Democrat friendly. Not that was the goal. It's just population changes. That's what happened. And it looked like she was down by 8 points at that time. So even with a more friendly district, I think it's probably safe to say that she's down still. It really, at this point, if Virginia 10 is really close, a district like that. So 2 and 7 would fall first. If Virginia 10, Biden plus almost 20 district is close, like some of the internal polling suggests on both sides, that's a very bad sign for Democrats. I actually think that's one that the Democrats going to hold on in, but we'll see.
Very interesting. Rich, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was good being here. All the best.
You as well. Well, our parent company, Nexstar, will have live coverage of the 2022 midterms. November 8th, News Nation will be broadcasting live starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they're partnering with Decision Desk HQ to call all the big races. They'll also have journalists from across the country, including journalists from The Hill. And of course, we'll have post-election coverage for you right here on Rising. And we'll have more Rising right after this.